Welcome, everybody, back to the Holistic Savage podcast, where we like to talk about all things related to functional health, including but not limited to functional medicine, functional fitness, spirituality, psychology, nutrition, kind of everything in between. So, this podcast is really a passion project for me, so we can put, good education, good knowledge out there to, raise the collective vibes, help people find good health information so they can empower and educate themselves and heal themselves. So, today, I'm very honored to have a very special guest, Kate Soloviova from Precision Nutrition. Kate, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Brendan. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit here because, I have to set the stage. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense where, a lot of my followers or people that listen to my podcast, I think they kind of associate me mostly with kind of the functional medicine space. But what a lot of my more regular followers know is my background is in fitness and nutrition coaching. And I'm kind of one of those guys that I really came up through the functional fitness and nutrition space. And actually, precision nutrition level 1 was the very first certification I ever did. I did my NASM, I did my PN1. I was in the first ever PN2 public class, which I thought was an amazing program. And as I then really steered hard more into kind of the functional lab testing and functional medicine space, in a way, it dawned on me that I felt like I was taking some of my coaching skills and my background almost for granted. I almost kind of assumed, like, yeah, everybody has like great behavior modification, client centered coaching skills. But what I've really found as I get deeper and deeper into this space is I think there's a pretty big gap. I think there's kind of a lot of missing coaching skills that I really feel are perhaps the biggest reason why a lot of clients or patients aren't really finding success with some sort of health building program. And further, there's so many new kind of certifications popping up in left and right. But I have so many students and peers that come to me like, well, Brendan, I want to get started in the industry. Well, what do you recommend as a starting point? And precision nutrition has always been just my first recommendation. So, Kate, I'd love to start this conversation by hearing a little bit about what your role is with precision nutrition.
Yeah, great question. So I started with PN a number of years ago. Actually, I found PN as a client. One overlap between probably me and functional medicine, or all things holistic, if you will. I started doing yoga many years ago now, and I really got into it. It ended up probably being my very first movement practice. It was the first thing I've ever done very consistently, very intensely on a very regular basis. And I ended up doing my yoga teacher training and teaching yoga for a number of years. I went to India for 6 months to study yoga and travel. And it was probably one of the most amazing things I've ever done. But the one downside of that trip is that I came back significantly heavier than I left.
Mm.
And Indian food and rice and bread and rice were not super kind to me. So when I came back, I really just felt out of touch with my body. I didn't feel at home in my skin. I felt very at home in my mind at the time, but there was that disconnect. And I learned about precision nutrition from a friend, and it just sounded great. It sounded evidence based and sane, and they weren't selling supplements, which I kept looking for, like what was their shtick, and I just couldn't find it. So I looked into them and ended up joining the program as a client. It's a 12 months coaching program. And it was probably one of the most transformational years of my life, not just physically, but because I really found precision nutrition has been has been suggesting the approach to health that I perhaps have not encountered before. For example, one outcome of that year, and I lost some weight, I got fitter, I got stronger, I got faster, but one outcome was that I actually ended up in therapy.
Mm.
And that was one of the probably biggest takeaways for me that year too. But one thing PN encourages is to focus on stress management and mental health and social support. And that was a very groundbreaking to me at the time, right? Because I was very much like, what do you do when you work out? You get on a treadmill for 30 minutes and you sort of count how many calories the machine says you burned. And then you eat those calories in Twinkies 40 minutes later while drinking Gatorade, right? So uh, it was just a mind shift. So after I finished that year, I stayed on as a mentor in that same program. And shortly after, I actually came on board as one of women's coaches with my background, my academic background being in psychology. And I was teaching psychology and health at the time at college and university level and teaching yoga. And I was really looking for a career shift.
Mhm.
So this was really the part where I realized after my own transformation, I wanted to help others as well. I wanted to do this health coaching thing. So PN just really came, I think, in my life at the right time. And since then, I have switched from coaching women to coaching other coaches through level 2 certification, which is our year-long master class. And since then, have switched roles yet again. And now I kind of joke that my job at PN can probably best described by the new Facebook emoji that you have seen. It's the care huggy
Mm.
emoji. So I am now the director of community engagement, which really just means I look after all the PN communities for our coaches and make connections and build relationships with the coaches and help coaches build those connections and relationships amongst themselves.
Oh, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I remember in our email thread to set this up, somebody had mentioned something about, kind of being the queen of the hugs and all of that. And I was like,
That's me.
I love it. I love it. And I love everything you said there, where for one thing, actually, I was just talking to my sister and a client this past weekend separately, but they had both been living in Philippines and Thailand and over there. And both very health and fitness conscious, but they both were kind of expressing the same thing of, the food availability and maybe not like coming back to the States and dropping weight because they had a little bit more influence with their diet. But what a transformative experience, I'm sure, though, in the amount of mindfulness and kind of inner connection that you probably developed through that.
Yeah, it was amazing, and I think India is it's a very powerful country, powerful in terms of energy. Usually, when I talk to fellow travelers, folks either strongly connect with it or they strongly do not connect with it. And I
Hmm.
loved it. I absolutely loved it. Just the vibe of
Yeah.
it, and the culture and the people were amazing.
Absolutely. Well, and so I love, your journey with precision nutrition. I can totally see how your background is perfect for what precision nutrition is all about. And to your point, again, since I started my career with PN and everything, or at least the credentials, that was just kind of my backbone. But I have over, gosh, I've been doing my thing for like 10 years now. I don't feel old enough to say I've been doing anything for 10 years, but here we are. And I've definitely found that there really is, I haven't seen anything else that compares. And what I think precision nutrition does extremely well is, for one thing, they are teaching, very scientifically sound, science, right? They're teaching, textbook physiology, biochemistry. So you have that strong scientific understanding. But then I like how, rather than focusing on, how can we biohack or how can we modulate this pathway or whatever, it's like, okay, that's cool, like acetyl CoA, whatever. Let's look at all that. But now let's zoom out. Like, what actually matters? How do we actually move the needle? How do we change your behaviors? How do we change that day-to-day routine, which is actually going to lead to results? Um, and the level 2 program was very unique, and it resonated with me so much because I do feel that as a human I have these kind of qualities of empathy or being an active listener, but I'd never seen some of this stuff put into like a teachable curriculum. And that was just mind blowing and kind of game changing for me. And I really believe that skill set is kind of grossly missing today or underutilized. And something that I see in my space a lot is, people, consumers, clients, it's almost like they would much rather, go run a bunch of lab testing to kind of have like something external to self to sort of point the finger at, like, it's not really my fault that I'm not getting results. It's because I have this gluten intolerance or I have this, infection, whatever it is that lab test might be suggesting. But obviously, if we're not dealing with the psyche, the relationship with self, the relationship with food, how are we really going to evoke, lasting change? So I'd love to hear you speak to this a little bit of what your observations are and how you empower coaches to be able to implement this kind of stuff in their practice or business.
Yeah, I think you made a very astute observation just about the style of information that precision nutrition offers, because I think it is geared very much towards, I hate to say normal people, right? But normal people, because again, like you can measure HRV and test your poop if that's your thing. That's awesome, right? Like high five. You probably live in San Francisco, right? And you go to quantify self meetups, and that's awesome, right? If that's your thing. It isn't really a thing for probably 90% of the population. And I think the downside is that when 90% of the populations hear about that, it really sounds incredibly overwhelming.
Mhm.
It's where do I begin? Like, should I also be testing my poop, right? And it's like, where do I start? You need all these gadgets and Fitbits, and there are these data trackers coming out of the wazoo, right? Like we're plugged in, and where the vast majority of us would probably just simply do well by tapping into our hunger cues, for
Mhm.
example, right? Like uh, I had an exchange with a friend that made me giggle last week, because she mentioned that she had some of her best sleep after her acupuncture appointment, as indicated by her data tracker. So in the morning, her data tracker has informed her that her sleep recovery score was in the 90s, right? And I said, that's so cool. I actually had some of the best sleep too, because I had an acupuncture appointment that same week. She's like, oh, like what did you use? Fitbit? Like how did you know? And I said, no, subjective perception. You ever heard of it? Right? And we kind of both laughed, but I think there is something there where the data trackers, like all the information that is given to us, at least theoretically, should not really be telling us anything that we don't already know.
Mhm.
Right? Like, ooh, your sleep was crap last night. You really probably don't need a tracker to tell you that. Like, when you
Mhm.
wake up in the morning, when you don't feel rested. And I think most folks find precision nutrition through that information that we put out, because there is an incredible amount of really well written articles out there. And I remember at some point, this was way before I even was working for PM, because I would look into topics. I would Google fish oil,
Mhm.
or I would Google, like nutrition for injury or something like that. And the same company just kept coming up, right? Like the PN articles would pop up, and they stood out to me. Like the articles stood out because they weren't really claiming magic. They
Mhm.
weren't promising a bigger butt in 27 days, right? They always included research citations. And I felt that incredibly refreshing. So I actually went as far as to seek out, like, what did precision nutrition say about creatine, right? Like I would Google precision nutrition plus creatine. So
Mhm.
I almost stopped looking at other resources, because I found this one resource that I could trust, where I knew that a team of experts looked into this information and wrote it up in an accessible manner.
Mhm. Yeah, the precision nutrition blog is legendary. Like there's some amazing articles on there, and some amazing authors and figures, guests, guest bloggers and whatnot. So I that totally resonated with me. It's like, yeah, that was like my early career. I was just scouring everything I could eat up. And it's funny what you're saying about the HRV and subjective perception, because I had somebody just this week telling me, like, oh, my Aura ring said that I had a horrible night's sleep. I feel like I slept well though. And so I kind of poked a little
Right.
bit at that. I was like, so you feel like you slept well, but now you're kind of judging your quality of sleep based on an external device. Like, that's
Yeah, and I
insane.
think that is such a great point because the conversation that I often had, usually with female clients, when the scale is not helpful, right? When sometimes they wake up and they slept well, they ate well, they've been working out consistently for 2 weeks. They wake up, they feel like a stone cold fox, right? They just feel great, ready to take on the world. They look in the mirror, they wink at themselves, right? Like, and then they go into the bathroom, they get on a scale, and the scale spits out a number at them,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden their whole stone cold foxiness is gone in a split second. Right? And we have that conversation around nothing happened. Nothing happened between you looking at yourself in the mirror that morning and giving yourself a wink and really feeling it, and
Hmm.
then stepping on a scale. You didn't gain 25 pounds between walking from the mirror to the bathroom, right? But that subjective number has the power to spoil your entire day. So, one of the things that we talk about often with clients is what measures, what outcomes are helpful
Hmm.
and what measures are hurtful. As a rule, there probably should be some outcomes, but I think we very easily default to something like a scale because it's easy. It's much harder to measure energy. It's much harder to measure sex drive,
Hmm.
right? Or how maybe good you feel, right? Like there is a little bit more thinking involved there where
Hmm.
you can just step on a scale and the scale tells you yay or nay,
Hmm.
right? So it's easy.
You know, that reminds me of a time a few number of years ago, I guess at this point, when I was still doing some personal training. I had a client who, great lady. And there was this one day she came walking in the studio just beaming. And she was not the beaming type, usually. A lot of, emotional issues there. But she was just beaming. I've had a great day. I feel so good. And we hadn't been stepping on the scale at all, as part of her coaching, because we had determined like it's not serving you. It's kind of destructive. And she's like, I feel so good. I think I want to step on the scale. I'm like, are you sure? Like, okay. So we go step on the scale, nothing, no change, completely just, and she went from high as could be to bottomed out just like that. And so just speaking to your point of, yeah, I think it's imperative for coaches to, determine the SMART goal and the, what measurements are we going to specific, measurable, attractive, realistic, timely of what metrics are we going to use to gauge progress. And you know uh, precision nutrition level 2 curriculum, there was that lesson that was like steal from everywhere, which I think
Hmm.
is hilarious, and amazing. But I, to this day, have been using, there's like that circle of life exercise that you guys have where it's this beautiful pie chart, and it goes over kind of these, physical measurements, if you will, and your social life, your work life, your, all these different aspects to make up kind of all the areas of your life. And you can shade it in of how satisfied you are. I still to this day use that in conjunction with other stuff like lab testing and whatnot, but I still use that to this day as a means to track subjective progress over time, because ultimately, aren't we kind of trying to improve somebody's overall, subjective perception of their quality of life?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And what you describe in the wheel of life is an exercise I use almost with all of my clients when we start working together. So we can kind of get a sense of the baseline. Like, let's take a look at where your wheel is limping.
Hmm.
And then we talk about where they want to begin. And this is a similar concept to the concept of deep health that we talk about at Precision Nutrition, that health is not just one thing. Health is not a six pack or muscles or great blood work, but rather it's multiple aspects, right? It's a complex concept that includes emotional aspect, physical aspect, environmental, mental, existential, relational. And I think if you talk to anyone who really went far out on one aspect
Mhm.
of their deep health, they can tell you that often other aspects suffer. Like you ask
Mhm.
any bodybuilder prepping for a show and ask them how's their emotional health doing in the last few weeks prepping for a show, right? Or how their social health is doing. They're not going out, they're not seeing friends, right? Like they're kind of on the edge, they're angry, they're grumpy because they haven't seen a carb in 6 weeks, right? So and again, like that's very much the it's worthwhile in that context. But for most people, we are looking to strike a balance of sorts. And usually, one thing I say to my clients, you can do anything for limited amount of time. Like you
Mhm.
want to burn candle at both ends because you're working on a launch or you're working to start your company or let's talk about mothers of newborns, right? Like this is all out, but for a period of time, and there's got to be that light at the end of the tunnel. Like there's got to be the end. I think John Berardi uses the example of burners. Like you can't have all the burners going on high all the time, but
Mhm.
rather you dial up and dial down. Something is simmering, something is higher heat. What are you focusing right now? And if I have a client that comes to me and we look at their wheel of life and everything sucks, everything, we still talk about, well, where do you want to start? And
Mhm.
if they don't have input, and sometimes they don't because everything truly sucks, then this is where I suggest to start with the physical health, just because it has such an impact on everything else. Like it's an easy start because in some ways we can grab a whole bunch of low hanging fruit there
Mhm.
and collect a bunch of easy wins.
Mhm.
And nothing motivates as wins. Like you just start, like it's like a video game, right? Like you collect little coins as you run around, and easy wins generate bigger wins, and then you're even more motivated to keep changing.
Man, I'm having so much fun already because, like, it's not too often I get to talk about all this stuff because I just heard the low hanging fruit, and I'm like, big Kahuna, low hanging fruit. What do we
That's
feel
right.
like today?
And speak.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. But I do. I think that circle of life exercise is amazing because yeah, we can really see what areas are suffering, and we only have so much time, so much energy, so much money to devote to any given aspect of our life. So I do think it's crucial for coaches and health professionals to work with the client rather than being kind of a dictator, crack the whip sort of thing of yeah, like you said, where do you want to start? And hey, sometimes they might feel really motivated. Let's maybe try fishing for that big kahuna versus hey, a little fatigue, a little worn out, feeling a little disheartened. Why don't we pick some kind of low hanging fruit along the way? And something that I always found rather difficult. I think we both recognize today's world is so high speed, information overload, paralysis by analysis, kind of this addiction to instant gratification, which you guys have a great lesson about delayed gratification and the serotonin response and whatnot. But I am curious to hear you speak to navigating when I think a lot of coaches and professionals might resonate with this, where there's so many professionals that are striving to build their independent entrepreneurial clientele book of business, and I think that's a challenge by itself and enough, just building a business or building a clientele. But I think there's a certain amount of pressure on coaches to like instantly satisfy the client. The client's paying good money, however much per hour, whatever it is, and of course, the client might be coming in with this sort of instant gratification mindset. But I think a really good coach, it's going to be their job to sort of check that a little bit of like, hey, I understand you want instant gratification, but so I'd love to hear you speak to like, how do you work with kind of reeling somebody in of like, all right, well, we can't just do the instant gratification. Or almost like holding their attention and focus with this more slower intentional behavior modification.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I think a lot of clients that I end up working with, and a lot of clients that work with precision nutrition in various contexts are coming from the quick fixes. And it can be very difficult to tolerate slow rates of
Hmm.
weight loss, slow rates of weight gain, like whatever your goals are, when you have previously dropped 12 pounds in 12 days. So what can be really useful in those cases is simply talking about their past experience. Like it's a bit of a motivational interviewing conversation where you ask open-ended questions simply to lead the clients to their own conclusion. Because as a
Hmm.
coach, you probably have your suspicions. They're working with you for a reason. They have done the grapefruit diet, the cabbage soup diet, the Weight Watchers, whatever else. And here they are working with you. So, I mean, clients are probably not going to come to me if they're looking to lose 20 pounds in 20 days. That's just not my jam. And I think after a while, you establish your own brand, if you will. Like folks know what they will find with you. So if you are the coach who is on that longer term behavioral modification train, what you do is habit based, I would imagine that that is part of your marketing, part of your message, part of your content, part of your initial consult. So it shouldn't be a huge shock to a client by the time they actually start working with you that you're not giving them a severely calorie restricted meal plan. Like, they should know that already. However, after working with you for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, they might be getting a little itchy because this is the point at which they would have lost 5 pounds last time they ate nothing but beef, right,
Hmm.
for 10 days. And all of a sudden, this is not happening. So the conversation I usually have is like, well, hey, tell me last time you were seeing faster rates of weight loss. And they will say something like, well, when I did Weight Watchers, I lost, 7 pounds in 7 days. And I'll say, that's cool. And then what? How long did that last? And they say, well, that went on for 2 weeks. All right. And then what happened? Well, and then I probably fell off the wagon and I rebounded and I tried something else a month later. So we kind of have that conversation with them. And notice the difference is there, I'm not telling them that, but I probably know that story. And I'm asking them the question to elicit that story from themselves. It really, so from the point of behavioral modification, words have just so much power, so much more power when they come out of our own mouth. So half of the time, my job as a coach is simply asking the right questions that will elicit the right answers. Right? Like I know what I want them to say, but I need them to say it. And this is where that little aha moment goes off, where they kind of mope a little bit. They're like, "I know what you're trying to do." I'm like, "What?" Is that I've been here before and I'm trying something new. And something new is probably going to be a little bit different. Right. And the other example I often use is I ask, tell me how long it's taken you to gain 40 pounds because you want to lose 40 pounds. So they talk about, it's taken them 6 months, a year, 3 years. Say, cool. It's been 3 weeks. Right. So just putting that in perspective as well. But it's
Hmm.
tough, right? And part of it is also acknowledging that, hey, I want fast results too. When I want to run faster or lift more, I also find it frustrating that, my muscles do not look bigger after one workout. I think that's incredibly unfair of a situation, right? Like I feel like they should look bigger and they do not. What the heck's up with that?
What gives? Yeah. It's a beautiful answer to what is kind of a complex phenomena, and makes me think that movie Inception. You kind of have to hack their mind a little bit and plant that seed and let that seed grow into their own unique idea. Um, but part of what I was just hearing, there's a lot to be said of creating and holding a calm, deliberate, mindful space to open up that dialogue. I definitely know in my past, and I see with other professionals, there's kind of a lot of monkey mind banter back and forth of like, well, I want to accomplish this goal, and okay, great, here's how we're going to scientifically make that happen magically. And again, that's where, with this explosion of, there's new functional lab tests hitting the market every day. And I have my thoughts and opinions on some of that, where I think some of that could be potentially empowering and potentially distracting. Something that I run into a lot is people coming to me of, well, I want to run this test or that test. And it's like, well, it doesn't really matter what test result says what or how fancy the protocol if we haven't mastered those fundamental behaviors and developing the mindfulness of, are you even aware of your day-to-day behaviors and how those might be counterproductive to what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, the one question I hear quite a bit is, what tests should I run? Which is a silly question in isolation, right?
Mhm.
Because it's one of those like, what tool should I use? I have no idea. Do you need a chainsaw or do you need a hammer? Like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to hang a picture on the wall? Then please don't use a chainsaw. Like, it's just unnecessary. It's an overkill, and you're probably going to spend a bunch of money and end up with destroyed walls, right?
Mhm.
So, when we ask a question like, hey, what test should I run? The client is probably 25 steps ahead of
Mhm.
where they should be. And this is sort of where my job is as a coach to take them back 25 steps and sit down and say, let's have that conversation. You want to run some tests? That's cool. Let's try and help you figure out what those tests are. Why do you feel like you need any tests at all? What are you trying to figure out? And say, well, I haven't been sleeping well. All right, let's take a look at what sleep looks like. Going back to newborn baby, if there's a newborn baby that wakes up 7 times a night, that's not much of a mystery, right? We don't need a test to tell us that. If you're trying to get a test on a vitamin deficiency, is there a symptom that you're concerned about? And this might be the part where I send you onwards to your medical professional to inquire about that. But very frequently, the question is, hey, what are you trying to do first? Right? It's not, which workout should I do? What are you trying to do? Which test should I run? What are you trying to do? Right? Should I cut out oranges or bread out of my diet? I don't know. What are you trying to do?
I love that. And I'm so excited to release this episode too, because my business these days is training professionals and practitioners and doctors and stuff on how to incorporate testing responsibly. Because I see a lot of, they'll get some education and then do this kind of shotgun of like, well, the way that I work with clients is I run this stack of expensive lab testing, and the efficacy is a different conversation, but then here's the protocol, retest. But that's exactly it. Like, I couldn't agree with that more of like, okay, well, why do you want this data? What is this data going to do for you? How is that going to change either what the professional is going to recommend or what the client then chooses to do? And I loved I might have to borrow that about the chainsaw. Well, you're going to waste a lot of money and have torn up walls. I love that. And I think it's so, so true. And there's a balance with that of, I think testing can at times reveal very, valuable healing opportunities. So it can be used as like a coaching tool or a compliance tool to some degree. But at the end of the day, though, that's totally secondary to the day-to-day behaviors and fundamentals. So I love how you put that.
Yeah. So, and I think that you said something really, really cool. It's, how is this data going to inform my decision making? I
Yes.
think is very important to consider, right? So, because I remember doing a 23andMe test years ago now, and there's a section there, at least there was at a time, that was asking you whether you wanted to find out, you know, something Alzheimer's disease, right? It's like
Yeah.
you actually specifically had to agree
Yep.
to that information. And I paused for a second because I remember thinking, well, am I curious? Yes or no? Sure, I was curious. I have Alzheimer's disease in my family, so it's very likely that I would have the whatever genetic makeup that makes it slightly more likely. But one question I was asking is, if it is a yay, then what? Like, what would I do differently? And the reason was nothing, because I know what the general consensus is currently in terms of preventing Alzheimer's disease to the best of our knowledge. And what it is, it's actually very consistent with preventing any other chronic condition. It's the same as preventing cancer and heart disease. It's regular physical movement, and it's eating mostly a diet of whole foods. And we're kind of back to deep health.
Hmm.
So I ended up finding it out, and knowing fully well that it wasn't going to change anything that I was doing. Yet somebody else could be in exactly the same scenario, and they might have wanted to find that out, and maybe finding out that they were more susceptible to a particular condition would have been the wake up call that they knew they needed, because they needed that change in their lifestyle. And if so, high five. Other folks who know themselves to be the anxious types, maybe that's not the information that would be helpful, because you don't actually know if you're going to end up with cancer or Alzheimer's disease. I mean, as far as we know, something's going to kill you eventually. So, which one it is and how many years from now it's going to be, how are you living right now? And hopefully, like, I remember for me, that was a big realization. And that was actually a number of years after I've done the PN coaching, where January 1st was coming up, and I had that little itch in my belly to do something. Because it's January 1st, right? Like, what shall I give up? Or
Hmm.
what kind of detox am I going to try, right? Or what kind of new diet am I going to? And I remember realizing that I don't really want to change anything. Like, I want to wake up on January 1st and do the exact same damn thing I've been doing every single day the entire year before. And that felt incredibly liberating. It felt like, yeah, this is the space where I want to hang out. It feels good. I am moving regularly. I'm eating well. And this is good. Like, this is deep health. And I'm hoping that to kind of help more folks get to that space. And when it comes to testing, sometimes, and that's a tough conversation. And this is one of those where sometimes coach needs to maybe say it as it is, if
Hmm.
that's what they see. We sometimes use testing as a way to find that there is something wrong with us,
Yep.
right? As a solution,
Hmm.
where it just feels much easier to say, well, I feel like I'm not losing weight. Maybe there's something wrong with my hormones. Maybe I have low thyroid, whatever the heck that means, really, right?
Hmm.
So, where from the coaching perspective, I've coached dozens of people with various thyroid conditions, whether it's Hashimoto's or low thyroid or PCOS. And at the end of the day, exactly same things apply. Exactly same things apply. Sometimes consistency needs to be higher.
Hmm.
It's true. Where most folks may get away with 80% consistency, really just hitting things, you know, 8 times out of 10. And for somebody with a thyroid condition, they might need to shoot for a nine,
Hmm.
9.5, really, to get those same results. But they are the same results. But it's hard work.
Hmm.
And it's much easier to say, well, instead, I'm going to see my doctor, but my doctor didn't find anything wrong with me. So I'm going to go see a functional doctor, an osteopath, and a naturopath, and an acupuncturist, and a nutritionist, and a dietitian. And off you bounce from
Yeah.
one practitioner to the next until you find one who finds something wrong with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, yes. Okay. We're into it now. I loved the what you were saying about the 23andMe and the genetics, because I did the same thing. I did that test back in the day, and I referred to exactly that. Where you have to consent towards, like, do you want to know, like, what your genetics may or may not kind of predispose you to, and then that informed decision making of, okay, so with this information, how does that change my behavior or action plan or whatever it is. And I love what you're saying about deep health, because that's something, as much as I love my industry, I do kind of poke a little bit of like, all the testing, all the fancy protocols don't get you very far without consistent deep health practices. An example that, like, so one of the big things I work with and educate on is like mold illness. And so we've got these urinary mold toxin tests, which is a great way to either empower somebody or freak them the hell out. Because scenario A, you have somebody unknowingly living in a water damaged building. They're horribly symptomatic. They're not feeling well. Medical doctors are saying it's all in your head. Okay, well, doing this toxin excretion test would be very revealing and empowering of like, oh my gosh, I knew that it wasn't just me. I knew that there was something else deeper going on here. Like, I got to get out of this moldy home. It's poisoning me. But that exact same data in a different scenario could be very misleading, where I had an individual who, and that's where the technicalities of the testing become very nuanced. Because I had another individual who had some of the highest, toxin levels on the test I've ever seen, but was completely asymptomatic. So, is that data, oh my gosh, like, look how sick and then they start kind of thinking themselves into sort of an illness. But you made a very important point. That's something I've been blabbering about for a minute now, where I am seeing a lot of kind of this sort of window shopping, bouncing from professional, practitioner, just like you said. And it's like, it feels as if they are just searching for that professional that's going to tell them what they want to hear for their own kind of confirmation bias of, no, it's not because I'm not managing my stress or eating whole foods consistently or moving my body or practicing positive psychology. I just need more selenium, or I need a bump in my armor thyroid or whatnot. But as you said, I mean, a lot of the deep health core principles that would help prevent Alzheimer's or PCOS or subthyroid, whatever it is, it always gets us back to those basic fundamentals.
We want something interesting. We want something exciting, right? Like, we want to know that we don't really want to have some sort of weird ass condition, but we kind of do. Like, it's this very weird, right? Like, I mean, to be told that, hey, you just need to sleep more and eat better is very disappointing.
Yeah.
It's not sexy at all. Right? And yet that's where the solution is 9 times out of 10. And I'm a big proponent of using the simplest solution, not the most complicated solution, just for the sake of it. So if there is a good argument for supplementation or medication, for that matter, right, or additional treatment, then absolutely 100%. So, like, one example, I suffer from seasonal depression every year and have been for years. So come October, November, I start putting together the protocol. And this is where I pull out all the stops, right? Like, so the exercise, the diet, but also the supplementation. And I remember talking to my psychologist one year, asking her, I said, should I go on antidepressants? And we kind of went through all the things I've been doing. And she shrugged and she said, probably not, because you're already doing all the things. You're probably not going to see any improvements above and beyond that. But this is the part where it's like, we check all the boxes, including supplementation. But I would never start with supplementation. That's just not the biggest blocks. This is not the biggest bangs for my buck.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the big rocks, right? You
That's
got to
right.
have those big rocks before you sprinkle those pebbles in, or the sand or the water. And so, I think the medications or supplements or biohacks or gadgets and gizmos, it's like, that's the sand, that's the pebbles. Like, if we don't have those big rocks of and that's an interesting thing with our industry. I think the necessity for health coaches, health professionals has never been greater. But I also don't think our job has ever really been harder. I think our society has really been conditioned, right? We're conditioned to consume what is, kind of spoon fed to us basically through availability in the media and whatnot. And, talk to your doctor about this drug today. which we're one of two countries in the world that allows that in America. But that is kind of the thing that we're up against, where a lot of people have gone to their medical doctor and, oh, everything looks fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You just need diet and exercise. The ever vague, diet and exercise, which then kind of leads down the road of, well, I need a personal trainer. I need a crash diet. I need to work out hard. And I find a lot of that there's kind of this toxic psychology soup that kind of comes from all of that. A lot of the source of motivation to begin some sort of health building program is usually out of a place of kind of self-loathing, right? Like, I'm not good enough. I don't like myself. I don't like how I feel. And I don't think a kind of negative self-perception is ever going to be like adequate fuel for the fire of growth. So I think we as coaches have to do a lot around shifting the mindset, shifting the perception, kind of reframing of let's observe without judgment those self-limiting beliefs, and how can we dismantle some of those self-limiting beliefs and start building up, the self-belief framework, so that way we can, manifest their dreams or whatever.
Well, there's a concept in psychology called the paradox of change,
Mm,
where you can hate yourself into change. Lots of people do,
yeah.
right? There's a lot of white knuckling involved. Normally, if you ever go into any commercial gym, you will see probably at least a couple of folks in there doing just that. The way to tell those folks apart is that they're on the same cardio machine every single time you go there. They do exactly 20 minutes, 5 days a week. They hate every single minute that they're on it, right? But they're doing it because it's quote unquote good for them. I've always questioned that approach because I don't know how good it is for you truly to be doing something that you hate, honestly, right? So, and there is that paradox where, yes, we can hate ourselves into change, but we can't really do it for a very long amount of time, nor does it feel very good during.
Hmm.
It's just not a good feeling. And instead, and that's what the paradox of change refers to, is the more we accept ourselves the way we are, the more likely we are actually to change, which is mind blowing if you think
Hmm.
about it. Like, if
Hmm.
I want to become healthier, or if I want to, I don't know, I'm a scrawny guy who wants to gain weight, it's actually me working on accepting myself as I am today and rocking that allows me to become more flexible in whether I want to change or not, rather than kind of like, this is horrible, you're disgusting, do this, right? The screamy, yelly approach based on self-loathing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think creating that space to see what comes up and be able to observe that, to observe those patterns, so then you can kind of create that. It's like a brain disruption, a behavior disruption of, and that's what I think is really cool about psychology and neuroscience and like neuroplasticity, where we're starting to kind of learn a little bit more about the brain of, like, it's kind of like the muscle. Like, we can train these neural networks to some degree of, um, one of my friends is a really great psychologist, and that's something she's big on, with kind of the more classic trauma therapy of, well, if we're trying to work somebody out of trauma, maybe we shouldn't always go and dwell in that kind of dark, negative, like reliving, re-experiencing, because it's kind of just like reinforcing those neural networks, kind of reinforcing those limiting beliefs. Whereas maybe if we spent more time kind of creating this new narrative and this new reframe that's a little bit more from a place of acceptance and love and compassion.
Yeah, I have conversations with clients sometimes working on identifying who says that. Right, like
Mm,
whose voice is it? Which sounds a little bit woo woo, but it's just when you get kind of into that deep coaching conversation, and you all of a sudden get a lot of hate back, right? Like on themselves, where they call themselves out and call themselves names. And I pause and I ask, just as a person, these things that you just said about yourself, you're disgusting, you're a failure. Would a kind person say that to someone? And they say, no, of course not. And I say, well, based on everything I know about you, you're actually a very kind person. Are you not? They say, yeah. I say, I think all of your friends, if I asked, they would actually describe you as kind, caring, considerate. And they would say, yeah, absolutely. All my friends would tell you that. So if a kind person would not say those things, you are a kind person and you just said all those things. I'm going to go out on a limb here and just assume that these things you said, they're not yours. You're not the one saying them. Somebody else is saying it, and I'm curious who that is.
Mm.
It's an interesting one because this is where folks often start crying,
Hmm.
right? It's tough because this is where trauma can come out,
Yeah.
or really, really tough relationship can come out, where parents often come up, primary caregivers come up, right? Like, that's my mom. My
Hmm.
mom has always said that, or my dad has always said that. That's, never good enough, or look at yourself. You have to do something about that. That's disgusting. And so, but it can be very helpful to demonstrate that separation, to help the client separate your inner voice from the other voices in your head. One of my favorite scenes in the movie Beautiful Mind. Do you know that movie with Russell
Hmm.
Crowe?
Hmm.
So the premise being a famous mathematician who suffers from schizophrenia, and in the movie he suffers from visual hallucinations. So there are characters in the movie that we later find out, spoiler, are not actually there. So he has relationships with them, he loves them, and yet we find out that they're just a figment of his imagination. Now, at the very end of the movie, as the character of Russell Crowe comes out of the classroom, there is a person there letting him know that he's been nominated for a Nobel Prize. And Russell Crowe grabs a student that's running by and points at the person talking to him and says, "Can you see him?" And the student says, "Yes." And he lets them go. And it was just, I love that scene so much because it really just shows how we can learn to function with our own dysfunction.
Hmm.
Because we know at that point, Russell Crowe still hears voices, he still sees things that are not there, but he developed skills that allow him to tell what things are real and what things are not. So it's not that the voices in your head are going to go away. You may still hear you're disgusting and you're a failure, but once you call it out, once you become aware of the fact that that's not actually you, that can be incredibly liberating because you can say there's like, yeah, that's nice. I heard that before, right? Off I go doing my awesome thing, being my awesome self, blah, 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 blah. It's just kind of that noise in the background. You can learn to push it away.
Hmm. That's extremely powerful. I love that so much, and it made me think of the 5 why exercise, which I've joked about before. It's like sometimes I got to stop at 4 whys because at 5 or 6 they start crying, and there's something to be said for that too. Of you have to develop that rapport and make them feel safe and heard and seen and understood. Because it's not until we create that safe space that I think people can become a little bit more vulnerable, and we see what kind of deep-seated emotional issues or trauma might kind of start bubbling to the surface a little bit. But man, I think that was such a powerful point in identifying those self-limiting narratives of like, well, no, whose voice is that really is. And it's like, if maybe if professionals spent more time kind of pulling at the root cause of the psychological, we don't have to go fishing for the root cause of the physiological so much.
Yeah, things fall into place oftentimes when we address the deep root causes, and I think folks in the functional medicine field know all that all too well, right? Because it's that like finding sometimes the missing block. And that missing block is sometimes or often not calcium, right? It could be something like um, I don't feel like I belong, or I just feel like I'm an imposter on a daily basis, right? Or I feel like I'm never good enough. It is often that story, and being able to at least start to begin to retell that story, I think can be very powerful. And I think it's interesting with the 5 whys because even in our coaching process, we often recommend that folks start with the 5 whys. But I think you're onto something where uh, people may not be there yet with you in the very, very beginning to go super deep. So I actually really like revisiting this exercise few months in, where we have built enough of rapport and enough of relationship to go even deeper, to go to the 5th why or the 6th if we need to that like really, really deep undercore. But I think it is valuable in the very beginning because in the traditional health and fitness space, I personally find it incredibly unfortunate that we don't question um, weight loss goals,
Hmm.
right? So when somebody comes to you and says, "So what are you trying to do?" "I'm trying to lose 10 pounds." "Cool, off we go." It's like, but why are you trying to lose 10 pounds? In order to what? "So I can feel better about myself." Huh. Okay. And why do you think you feel better about yourself when you're 10 pounds lighter? And that's a harder question because this is not a question that people many women often don't ask themselves. I mean, I know I've talked to enough fellow coaches, and oftentimes women don't remember last time they haven't been trying to lose weight,
Hmm.
which is incredibly broken if you think about it. Like you spend your entire life intentionally trying to change your body size,
Hmm.
sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. But remember talking to a colleague who said, "Hey, I realized recently I've been trying to lose 5 pounds my entire life, regardless of how much I weighed." So she would lose some weight. She would still be after losing 5 pounds. She would gain some weight. She would still be trying to lose 5 pounds. It was just that moving target. And it can be really distracting because all you're focused on is the scale. And this is part of where I often talk to my clients about bigger fish they have to fry than 5 pounds. And the numbers are often very specific and very arbitrary because there is no person out there who's going to significantly change their deep health through 5 pounds or even 15 for that matter, right? Like most of us can range 10, 20, 30 pounds in weight and be perfectly healthy and happy and functional in various ways. Now, chances are if you lose 100 pounds, you might notice quite a bit of change. You
Hmm.
might get up from the floor easier, going down the stairs might be easier, but those folks are not that common in our practice, I would say, right? The vast majority that I know I've worked with, that I see, it's this like magical number that we're after, the magical pair of pants. And I know for me over time, my practice has evolved from that perspective to where now most of the time I don't work with intentional weight loss. And weight loss is a side effect sometimes, kind of what you talked about when you work on something else and the weight falls off, right? Like so
Hmm.
through stress or through something else. I work with an acupuncturist right now who as a client, and we're working on shifting some of her practice to virtual offerings. So she teaches meditation and qigong. So we kind of go through tools, and she's made some really big decisions in her practice, some of the biggest decisions in 20 years. Last time I saw her in person, she looked 10 years younger and 20 pounds lighter. She has done nothing. It was just that deep health in her face. Right.
Hmm.
So I think that's really powerful. We have bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful. I think that really illustrates, what can happen when you're, living your deepest truth and living your purpose and really in that deeper alignment, right? And man, I think this whole conversation has been so enlightening and powerful. I really feel that this is a huge area that needs more focus. I think the coaching skills is really, I mean, you've really shown that the art of coaching, it's just as much an art as it is a science, and there's so many layers, so many dynamics to it. So certainly in a world that just keeps spinning faster and faster and more instant gratification, seduction here and there, I really hope this episode reaches a lot of people and empowers them with kind of a different way to be thinking about how to approach working with people. So I know you do have to get going, but I'm just so incredibly grateful that you took the time for this conversation. It was so fulfilling, even just for me.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It was great to be here and talk to you and all the folks here.
Absolutely. Well, I'll keep you posted on when we release the episode, but amazing conversation, and I definitely hope to stay in touch with you.
Me too. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a beautiful rest of your day, my friend.
You too. Be in touch.
All right. Sounds good. Have a good one.
Bye.